Hey guys, tonight we are setting sail on a rather peculiar sea, a sea of ink and imagination, as we explore the curious case of phantom islands on old nautical charts. Picture yourself, if you will, not in your cozy bed, but on the creaking deck of a wooden ship, centuries ago. The salty spray is cold on your face, the vast, dark ocean stretches in every direction, and your only guide is a precious, hand-drawn map. This map whispers of lands unseen, of riches, of dangers, and sometimes, of places that simply aren't there. It's a world where the line between discovery and delusion is as thin as a spider's thread. Honestly, with their navigation tools and penchant for bumping into things they weren't expecting, you probably wouldn't survive a week on one of those voyages, let alone figure out which island was real and which was just a figment of a lonely cartographer's dinner from the night before. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps the channel find other sleepy explorers like yourself. And while you're at it, why not type your current location and local time in the comments below? It's always fascinating to see where everyone is drifting off from. I'm here, as always, ready to spin a yarn from a comfy chair, probably with a cat attempting to help. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine holding one of these ancient charts. It feels less like a precise scientific instrument and more like a piece of art, a story waiting to unfold. The parchment is thick, perhaps a little stained with sea salt or wine. The coastlines are drawn with a confident, yet sometimes wildly inaccurate, hand. And there, in the vast expanses of the ocean, you see them, islands. Some are familiar, their shapes roughly corresponding to lands we know today. But others are phantoms. They have names, sometimes even detailed coastlines, mountains, and rivers etched onto the map, yet no explorer, no matter how diligently they searched, would ever set foot upon their shores. These are the phantom islands, the cartographic ghosts that haunted our maps for centuries, sometimes even into the age of steam and early photography. Why did these imaginary lands hold such sway over the minds of navigators, scholars, and kings? Well, to understand that, you have to place yourself in their salt-caked, probably very uncomfortable, boots. The world was enormous, and large parts of it were genuinely unknown to those in, say, 15th century Europe. Every voyage west from Portugal or south from England was a leap into profound mystery. The ocean wasn't just water, it was a realm of possibility, a place where anything could exist. Mermaids? Why not? Sea serpents capable of swallowing a ship whole? Entirely plausible. And, of course, islands. Islands of untold wealth, islands populated by strange beings, islands that appeared and disappeared with the tides or the whims of forgotten gods. It's a bit like how we look at outer space today, isn't it? We know there are planets, but what exactly is on them? Our ancestors just had a much wetter version of that unknown. These maps, you see, were incredibly valuable. A good chart could mean the difference between a successful trading voyage and ending up as fish food, or worse, stranded on an island that actually did exist but wasn't exactly the tropical paradise you'd hoped for, more like a barren rock with angry seabirds for company. Because they were so precious, and because printing was either non-existent or in its infancy for much of this period, maps were often copied by hand. And as anyone who's played a game of telephone knows, details get creative with each retelling. An ink blot here, a misread annotation there, and suddenly, a smudge becomes an island, or an island drifts a few hundred miles north. It wasn't always malicious, sometimes it was just human error, compounded over generations of mapmakers. Think of it as the original, copy-paste error, just with much higher stakes. Back then, your recalculating route often meant encountering a particularly grumpy kraken or sailing off what some believed to be the edge of the world, slightly more dramatic than your phone telling you to make a U-turn. Some of these phantom islands weren't just vague smudges either. Oh no, some came with elaborate backstories. There's a delightful quirkiness to the tales associated with them. Take the concept of wandering islands, for instance. It wasn't always assumed that an island, once sighted, would politely stay put. Some were believed to be untethered, drifting with the currents or perhaps even sentient, choosing when and to whom they would reveal themselves. Historians still argue whether some of these early phantom islands were genuine misidentifications of known land seen from an unusual angle, fleeting atmospheric phenomena like mirages which can look remarkably like distant land, or pure invention designed to secure funding for another voyage. There's gold on that one, Your Majesty, I just need a slightly bigger boat to find it again. The allure was powerful. An empty space on a map was almost an invitation. It was a void that the human mind, and particularly the ambitious minds of explorers and their royal patrons, yearned to fill. If a sailor, perhaps after a few too many tots of rum or just genuinely mistaken by a fog bank, reported seeing land where none was charted, who was to definitively say he was wrong? The ocean was vast enough to hide countless secrets. And so, the report would be noted, and perhaps, on the next edition of the chart, a new island would bloom in the middle of the ocean, a tiny speck of hope or a navigational headache, depending on your perspective. Some cartographers, bless their speculative hearts, seem to operate on the principle, oh, a vast empty space in the Atlantic? Let's pop an island in there. Looks a bit bare, darling, perhaps with some charmingly mythical creatures for good measure. It was less about what was definitely there, and more about what could be there. And in a world hungry for new territories, new trade routes, and new wonders, was often good enough to get an island onto a map, and into the collective imagination for a very long time. We'll be visiting some of these specific, stubbornly unreal places as we drift along. So, you're beginning to get the picture. These old maps were a wild tapestry woven from threads of genuine exploration, hopeful speculation, and, let's be honest, some truly epic misunderstandings. The phantom islands we spoke of didn't just appear out of thin air, conjured by a wish. They were often the logical, if somewhat bewildering, result of how early cartographers actually did their jobs. It wasn't like they could just fire up a satellite view or cross-reference with a dozen other instantly accessible sources. Oh no, their desktops were actual wooden desks, and their cloud storage was whatever didn't get eaten by rats in the ship's hold. Imagine you're an aspiring mapmaker in, say, Alexandria a couple of centuries after Ptolemy, or perhaps in a bustling European port during the so-called Age of Discovery. Your task is to create a chart of the known world, or at least a significant chunk of it. Where do you even begin? Well, you'd start by gathering information, and this is where things got wonderfully fuzzy. Your primary sources were often the accounts of sailors. Now, sailors are a fine and hardy bunch, brave souls who ventured into the terrifying unknown, but their primary skill wasn't always precise geographical surveying. After months at sea, battling storms, subsisting on hardtack that could double as a doorstop, and perhaps enjoying that third barrel of grog we touched upon earlier, their recollections of newly sighted lands could be, let's call it, creatively enhanced. You can just imagine the conversations. Captain, I swear on me mother's grave, I saw an island out there, shimmering like gold. And the trees, they bore fruit made of pure marzipan. Even with the best intentions, accurately judging distance, size, and location from a swaying deck, often in hazy weather, was incredibly difficult. Their idea of pinpoint accuracy was sometimes just managing to get back to their home port without accidentally discovering a new, very hungry sea monster. Then there were the ancient texts. Scholars like Claudius Ptolemy, whose work, Geographia, from the 2nd century AD was a cornerstone of European cartography for over 1,000 years, had already laid down a framework of the world. This was a monumental achievement, a mainstream historical fact of mapmaking. Ptolemy collated coordinates for thousands of places, a truly Herculean task. But, and it's a rather large but, his work also contains significant errors. For example, he famously overestimated the eastward extent of Asia, which, incidentally, made Columbus think he could reach the Indies by sailing west far more easily than was actually the case. Oops. So, you, our diligent mapmaker, are working with these revered ancient sources, which are already a bit skewed, and then you're trying to overlay the latest, possibly marzipan-fueled, reports from Captain Pegleg Pete. It wasn't just about miscalculations either. The very concept of what a map was differed. Today, we expect maps to be ruthlessly objective representations of physical reality. But in earlier times, they were often also cosmologies, theological statements, or even political propaganda. Think of the medieval TO maps, a wonderfully quirky and common type of world map. These depicted the known world, Asia, Europe, and Africa, as distinct segments within a circle, the O, often divided by waterways forming a T, representing the Don, the Nile, and the Mediterranean. Jerusalem was frequently placed right at the center, reflecting its perceived spiritual importance, and the whole thing was encircled by the Great Ocean. It wasn't designed for navigating the complexities of the South China Sea, it was a diagram of a divinely ordered world. And into these frameworks, brimming with spiritual and symbolic meaning, came the myths. The world beyond the horizon was often seen as the realm of the bizarre, the monstrous, the magical. Cartographers, drawing on ancient accounts from writers like Pliny the Elder, would sometimes populate the distant, unknown corners of their maps with illustrations of these marvels. You might find regions inhabited by the Blemii, men with no heads but faces in their chests, or the Cyapodes, who had a single giant foot they supposedly used for shade. Scholars continue to debate the extent to which these fantastical elements on early maps were intended as serious geographical claims, mere artistic embellishments to fill the terrifyingly empty spaces, or perhaps even allegorical warnings about the uncivilized nature of lands beyond Christendom. It's a cartographic Rorschach test, really. Did they really think a man with one giant foot lived there, or was it just a way of saying, this place is super weird, proceed with caution, and maybe pack an extra-large shoe for gifting? The tools themselves didn't help with precision. While determining latitude, your north-south position, was relatively straightforward using the sun or stars, calculating longitude, your east-west position, was a notoriously difficult problem until the invention of accurate marine chronometers in the 18th century. This longitude problem meant that islands could be discovered and then lost again with frustrating regularity, simply because no one could accurately pinpoint their east-west coordinates. An island reported at a certain latitude might be searched for in vain if its longitude was off by hundreds of miles. It's like that old game of whisper down the lane, but instead of a muddled funny phrase at the end, you might accidentally invent a brand new island, or make an existing one play hide-and-seek across the entire ocean. So, you, our cartographer, are there with your vellum, your inks, your dubious reports, your revered but flawed ancient texts, and your comparatively primitive instruments. You're trying to reconcile a sighting of a new island, 3 days' sail west of the Canaries, rich in parrots, with a map that shows only open ocean there. Do you ignore the new report? Do you adjust the coastline of Africa? Or do you, perhaps, sketch in a hopeful little blob, name it Isla de Loros, Parrot Island, and hope someone else figures out the details later? This blend of scarce data, the immense authority of classical sources, even when wrong, the difficulty of accurate measurement, and a worldview that readily accepted the marvelous and the monstrous, created the perfect conditions for phantom islands to be born, and to persist, sometimes for hundreds of years, as tangible features on the world's most sophisticated charts. It was a process of accretion, error, and earnest belief, all inked onto parchment. So, you're now steeped in the murky, fascinating world of early mapmaking, where good intentions and dodgy data danced a slow, confusing waltz across the parchment. You understand how a misplaced squiggle or an over-enthusiastic sailor's yarn could birth an island. Now, let's zoom in from the general to the specific and meet one of the rock stars, or perhaps, ice stars, of the Phantom Island world, the enigmatic and remarkably persistent land of Friesland. Imagine you're unfurling a grand map of the North Atlantic, drawn sometime in the late 16th or 17th century by a renowned cartographer like Gerardus Mercator or Abraham Ortelius. Your eyes trace the familiar coastlines of Iceland, Greenland, perhaps a hint of North America. And then, just south of Iceland, often depicted as a rather substantial landmass, sometimes even larger than Iceland itself, you see it, Friesland. It's not just a vague outline either. Oh no, Friesland often came with a surprising amount of detail: fjords, mountains, rivers, even named settlements. You might see a little cluster of buildings labeled Frislanda Herbs, the capital city, no less, or perhaps notations about its active volcanoes or bustling fishing ports. It's presented with such conviction, you'd half expect to find it listed in today's travel brochures. Friesland, come for the glaciers, stay because you're probably frozen solid. Not exactly prime beachfront property, unless you were a particularly hardy Viking penguin. The mainstream historical appearance of Friesland on the world stage, the moment it truly solidified in the European consciousness, was through a publication in 1558 by a Venetian named Niccolò Zeno. He released a map, the infamous Zeno map, along with a series of letters, supposedly detailing the voyages of his ancestors, the Zeno brothers, Antonio and Niccolò, way back in the late 14th century. According to these accounts, the Zeno brothers had sailed far into the North Atlantic, encountering various islands, including the prominent Friesland, which was described as a sophisticated and well-populated place. The narrative even mentioned a monastery with central heating from volcanic springs and inhabitants who spoke Latin, which must have been a delightful surprise for any Venetian visitor stumbling ashore. This Zeno narrative and its accompanying map had an enormous impact. Suddenly, here was seemingly concrete evidence, a detailed account from supposedly eyewitness explorers, of a significant landmass in a region that was becoming increasingly important for fishing and potential new routes to the east. Prominent mapmakers of the era, eager for new information to fill those tempting blank spaces, largely accepted the Zeno account at face value and dutifully began incorporating Friesland into their own influential charts. And once an island, especially one with such a detailed pedigree, made it onto a map by someone like Mercator, it tended to stick around for a good long while. It was like getting a blue tick verification in the 16th century. Friesland was, for all intents and purposes, map official. Now, you might be thinking, surely someone would have sailed there and realized it wasn't quite as advertised, or, wasn't there at all. And you'd be right to wonder. Explorers did indeed try. The English mariner Martin Frobisher, during his voyages in the 1570s in search of the Northwest Passage, actually sighted land he believed to be Friesland. He even landed there and formally claimed it for Queen Elizabeth I. The trouble is, the land Frobisher landed on was most likely the southern tip of Greenland. But because his maps showed Friesland as a separate entity south of Greenland, and Greenland further north, he found Friesland. This is a classic example of how preconceived notions, literally drawn onto your map, can shape your interpretation of reality. Explorers searching for Friesland had about as much luck finding the actual Friesland of the Zeno map as I do finding a matching pair of socks in the dark, lots of hopeful wandering, similar levels of befuddlement when reality didn't quite match the chart. The quirky details lavished upon Friesland are part of its enduring charm. Beyond its capital and Latin-speaking, geothermally warmed monks, some accounts and map notations hinted at its resources. It was often depicted as a place rich in fish, which made sense given its North Atlantic location. Some interpretations of the Zeno text even suggested trade with surrounding islands like Icaria and Estotaland, other phantoms we might brush past later. They drew this place with such confidence, you'd think they had a TripAdvisor page for it already. Friesland, 3 stars. Good fishing opportunities, bracingly chilly climate. Locals are reportedly literate, though possibly mythical. Bring a very warm coat. Of course, as time went on and more voyages crisscrossed the North Atlantic with increasingly accurate navigational tools, the persistent absence of this rather large island became harder and harder to ignore. By the late 17th and early 18th centuries, doubts were growing louder. Captains would sail right over Friesland's supposed location, finding nothing but very cold, very empty ocean. The true nature of the Zeno narrative and map remains a hot topic for discussion even now. Scholars still debate whether it was an elaborate Renaissance-era hoax by Niccolò Zeno the Younger to big up his family name, a heavily misunderstood and embellished account of genuine Norse voyages to Greenland or even North America that got twisted in the retelling, or perhaps a garbled transmission of older sagas and geographical knowledge. Was it deliberate deception, a sort of cartographic catfish, or just a very convincing muddle? Slowly but surely, Friesland began to shrink on maps, then it became marked as doubtful, and eventually, it vanished altogether, sinking back into the realm of myth from whence it likely came. Yet, for over a century, it was a fixture, a solid-looking piece of real estate that influenced exploration, shaped geographical understanding, and stands today as a prime example of how a compelling story, combined with the authority of the printed map, could create a land out of nothing but ink and imagination. It's a chilly reminder that seeing isn't always believing, especially when what you're seeing is on a very old, very persuasive map. Leaving the chilly, well-documented shores of the imaginary Friesland, our ship of dreams drifts southwards a little, still navigating by the flickering candlelight of old charts. You're now entering waters where another phantom played hide-and-seek with mariners for centuries, the elusive Buss Island. Unlike Friesland, which had that rather elaborate, if dubious, backstory courtesy of the Zeno brothers, Buss Island's origins are a bit more workaday, yet no less fascinating in how it snagged a place on the world map, perhaps fueled by a potent cocktail of exploration politics and the simple, fervent hopes of sailors. The story of Buss Island begins, as many of these tales do, with an English expedition. It's 1578, and Martin Frobisher, yes, him again, he seems to have had a knack for bumping into, or nearly bumping into, lands that weren't quite what they seemed, is on one of his voyages in search of the Northwest Passage. One of the ships in his fleet, a vessel named the Emmanuel, which happened to be a type of fishing boat known as a buss, reported sighting land. The crew didn't land on it, mind you, they just saw it from a distance. But in an age where any smudge on the horizon could be a new territory for the crown or a vital resupply point, a sighting was often enough. And so, based on this rather fleeting glimpse, Buss Island was born, named not after a particularly enthusiastic smooch, but after the type of ship that carried its first European beholders. Imagine being the captain of that ship. Captain, what shall we call this newly discovered land, if it indeed is land and not just a very large, oddly shaped cloud? Well, this fine vessel is a buss, so, Buss Island it is. It's got a certain straightforward charm, doesn't it? Less dramatic than Isle of Despair or Paradise Cove, but it did the job. Following this report, Buss Island began to appear on nautical charts, typically plotted somewhere between Ireland and the still very much charted Friesland, or sometimes a bit further west, tantalizingly close to the shipping lanes that were becoming increasingly busy. Its position wasn't always consistent. Phantom Islands had a habit of drifting around on maps as cartographers tried to reconcile conflicting reports, but its existence was, for a time, largely accepted. This acceptance wasn't just casual, it had real-world implications. For instance, the Hudson's Bay Company, that powerhouse of North American trade, took a keen interest in Buss Island. They even officially charted it in the late 17th century. You can imagine their board meetings, right, gentlemen, about this Buss Island. Could it be a useful staging post? A place to dry cod? Perhaps it's conveniently located next to a beaver lodge resort and spa, ideal for our trapping interests. The potential strategic or economic value of such an island, if it were real, was not insignificant. Naturally, with an island marked on the charts, especially one potentially useful, people went looking for it. And, as with so many of these phantom lands, they had a dickens of a time finding it. Multiple expeditions sailed to its supposed coordinates, peered through their spyglasses, and found a whole lot of ocean. One notable search was led by a Captain Thomas Shepherd in 1671. He was specifically dispatched by the English crown to locate Buss and claim it. He searched diligently but found nothing. This is where the story of Buss Island takes a rather dramatic, if convenient, turn. Instead of concluding that the island had been a mistake all along, a mirage, a misidentified piece of Greenland, again, or just an overly optimistic interpretation of a distant fog bank, a new theory emerged: Buss Island had sunk. Yes, you heard that right. It wasn't that it was never there, it was simply that it had performed the ultimate disappearing act, deciding to become a submarine attraction. Less paperwork that way, perhaps. This sunken land of Buss became a way to explain its absence without entirely discrediting the original sighting or the numerous maps that depicted it. This idea of a sunken island adds a wonderfully quirky layer to its mythology. It wasn't just a cartographical error, it was a lost land, a miniature Atlantis of the North Atlantic. It taps into that deep human fascination with things that are lost to the depths, adding a touch of romantic tragedy to what might otherwise be a simple case of oops, wrong coordinates. It's certainly a more exciting explanation than Lieutenant Higgins had a bit too much sun that day and mistook a large whale for an island. The persistence of Buss Island, even in the face of repeated failures to find it, speaks volumes about those exploration politics and sailors' hopes we mentioned. For nations vying for dominance of the seas and new territories, every potential island was a strategic chess piece. For sailors undertaking long, perilous voyages, the thought of a friendly landfall, a place to replenish water and food, or simply a landmark to break the terrifying monotony of the open ocean, was a powerful motivator to believe. Historians continue to ponder whether Buss Island was a genuine navigational error compounded over time, a fleeting glimpse of the coast of Greenland seen under unusual atmospheric conditions that distorted its appearance and location, or perhaps even a deliberate exaggeration or outright fabrication designed to encourage further exploration or investment in North Atlantic ventures. Maybe someone just really wanted to secure funding for the Grand Buss Island expedition of 1579, and an empty ocean wasn't a great selling point. Like Friesland, Buss Island eventually succumbed to the relentless march of more accurate surveying. As navigational techniques improved, and as more and more ships crisscrossed its supposed location without finding so much as a floating coconut, or its North Atlantic equivalent, perhaps a very lonely puffin, its presence on maps became increasingly untenable. It began to shrink, to be marked as existence doubtful, and then, by the 19th century, it had largely vanished from official charts, slipping beneath the waves of cartographic memory, whether it had physically sunk or not. It leaves behind a faint, salty trace, a reminder of a time when the ocean was vast enough to hide not just real islands, but also the fervent hopes, political ambitions, and occasional grand illusions of humankind, all inked onto a piece of paper that tried to make sense of an overwhelming world. You can almost hear the sigh of relief from ships' captains when it finally disappeared from the charts, meaning one less non-existent hazard to worry about. Our spectral voyage now takes a turn towards shores even more steeped in mist and mystery than those of Friesland or the sunken Buss. You're leaving behind the somewhat business-like phantoms, born of navigational errors and political hopes, and sailing into the realm of pure Celtic enchantment. Prepare to lower your anchor, metaphorically speaking, off the west coast of Ireland, as we seek the legendary, periodically visible island of Hy-Brasil. This isn't just a case of a misplaced measurement, this is an island with a soul, a character woven from centuries of folklore, a land that perhaps chose when, and to whom, it would reveal itself. Unlike the rather stark, icy image of Friesland, or the vaguely utilitarian hopes pinned on Buss, Hy-Brasil shimmers with a magical aura. Its name, sometimes written as Hy-Brasil, Brazil, or several other variations, has ancient roots in Irish lore, possibly linked to the Hy-Brasil, meaning descendants or clan of Braesal, a powerful and ancient kin group in Irish mythology. And no, before your mind drifts to sandy beaches and samba, it's generally believed that this name has no direct connection to the South American country of Brazil. Though, an island that reportedly only appears for one day every 7 years would make for a very exclusive, if somewhat inconveniently timed, holiday destination. Sorry boss, can't come to work for the next 7 years, waiting for Hy-Brasil to pop up again. Doctor's note to follow, maybe. Hy-Brasil was said to lie somewhere out in the Atlantic, west of Ireland, a kind of Tir na Nog, an otherworldly paradise, a land of eternal youth and happiness. It's a mainstream historical fact that this island appeared on nautical charts for an astonishingly long time, starting as early as Angelino Dulcert's 1325 Portolan chart where it's marked as Brasil. From then on, it became a remarkably persistent feature on maps for over 5 centuries, depicted by numerous respected cartographers, often as a circular island, sometimes with a river or channel dividing it. Think about that, for 500 years, this mythical place was given space on real maps, a testament to the power of legend and the allure of the unknown. But Hy-Brasil wasn't your everyday, run-of-the-mill phantom island that just sat there, stubbornly refusing to exist in a fixed location. Oh no, it had a particular quirk, a defining characteristic that made it even more tantalizing. According to many legends, Hy-Brasil was usually shrouded in an impenetrable mist, revealing itself to mortal eyes only for a single day every 7 years. Some versions of the myth suggest you had to be pure of heart, or particularly lucky, to catch a glimpse of its shores. This characteristic is a wonderfully fringed tidbit that adds to its mystique. So, if your ship's captain had, say, been a bit too creative with the accounting of the ship's biscuit supply, or perhaps had a less-than-saintly reputation, well, Hy-Brasil was probably going to remain firmly off his navigational itinerary. It was the ultimate game of peekaboo on a grand, oceanic scale. Now you see me, maybe, if you're good, now you don't. Better luck in 25-55 days. Given its legendary status and its tantalizingly brief appearances, it's no surprise that stories abound of those who claim to have seen, or even set foot upon, Hy-Brasil. Expeditions sailed from Ireland specifically in search of it. One of the most famous accounts is that of Captain John Nisbet of Killibugs, County Donegal, who, in 1674, supposedly not only found Hy-Brasil but spent time there with his crew. They returned with tales of a mysterious island inhabited by large black rabbits and a magician who lived in a stone castle. The magician apparently gave Nisbet a book of spells, which sounds like a rather unique souvenir from a voyage. Other tales describe it as a land of plenty, free from sickness and want, its inhabitants living idyllic lives. Whether these were genuine beliefs, tall tales spun for a credulous audience, or perhaps even allegories, they fueled the legend and kept Hy-Brasil alive in the popular imagination and on the maps. Folklorists and historians continue to explore the origins of the Hy-Brasil legend, debating whether it's purely a product of Celtic mythology, a distorted memory of a real but long-vanished landform. Some speculate about Porcupine Bank, an area of raised seabed west of Ireland that might have been exposed during periods of lower sea levels, or perhaps even inspired by complex atmospheric phenomena common in the North Atlantic, like superior mirages that can make distant objects appear to float or take on strange shapes. Could it be that on very rare, clear days, under specific atmospheric conditions, something was indeed seen that fueled these stories for centuries? Or was it simply a beautiful, enduring myth, a testament to the human need for enchantment in a world that was slowly, painstakingly being charted and demystified? As with our other phantom islands, the relentless march of scientific surveying and more accurate navigation eventually began to cast serious doubt on Hy-Brasil's physical existence. Its appearances on maps became less frequent, its outline fainter, sometimes marked with a cautious existence doubtful. By the late 19th century, it had mostly vanished from official admiralty charts. Yet, unlike some of the more prosaically debunked phantoms, Hy-Brasil never entirely disappeared. It simply retreated from the tangible world of lines on parchment back into its original home, the realm of folklore, poetry, and dreams. It remains a potent symbol of the magical and the unobtainable, a misty shore that perhaps can only be reached by the imagination. You can almost feel the soft sigh of the Atlantic wind carrying its name, a whisper of a land just beyond our grasp, forever shimmering on the horizon of possibility. Drifting away from the enchanted mists of Hy-Brasil, our phantom hunting vessel now steers back towards colder, more starkly defined, yet equally perplexing waters. You're leaving the realm of pure folklore and entering the territory of what might be described as a geographical echo, a cartographic stutter. Prepare to meet Groenland, an island that haunted the icy seas near Greenland, acting as its ghostly, often confusing, twin for many generations of map readers and mariners. This isn't an island that promised eternal youth or hid shyly behind a veil of mist. Groenland was more like that extra sock you find after you've already paired everything up, a bit baffling, definitely there on the list, or map, in this case, and you're not quite sure how it got there or what to do with it. Imagine you're a 16th century explorer, navigating the treacherous North Atlantic. You've got your astrolabe, your compass, hopefully it's not feeling too contrary, and your precious, painstakingly drawn chart. You're aiming for the vast, icebound land of Greenland. But as you approach, your map shows not one, but potentially two large landmasses in the vicinity, Greenland itself, and then, often depicted just to its west or sometimes even as an entirely separate entity nearby, this other place called Grokland. Greenland, apparently, had a less famous, somewhat shadowy twin. It was the cartographic equivalent of showing up for a blind date and finding two people who claimed to be your intended, both looking vaguely similar but insisting they're unique. Awkward. The appearance of Grokland as a distinct landmass is a mainstream historical fact, readily observable on some of the most influential maps of the Renaissance. For instance, Johannes Royce's 1507 world map, one of the very first printed maps to incorporate the discoveries in the New World and highly influential in its day, clearly shows Engrenland, a variation of Greenland, and then a separate land to its west which is identifiable as Grokland, or a precursor to it. Later, the great Gerardus Mercator, on his seminal 1569 world map, a cornerstone of modern cartography, also depicted Grokland as a separate island to the west of a misshapen Greenland. When mapmakers of this caliber included such a feature, it lent it an air of authenticity, regardless of the reality on the icy ground, or rather, icy water. Now, you can imagine the confusion this caused for navigators. Right, men, according to this chart, we should be approaching Grokland any day now. Once we pass that, it's on to Greenland. Or, is this Greenland, and that over there is Grokland? Gerald, are you sure you packed the good map? This geographical doppelganger could lead to significant miscalculations of position, wasted time searching for a passage between the two, that didn't exist because they were often parts of the same landmass, or misidentification of actual landfalls. If you landed on the east coast of Greenland, but your map told you Grokland should be there, you might mistakenly believe you'd found Grokland, further perpetuating the error. So, how did Greenland get this spectral sibling? The origins of Grokland are thought to lie in a fascinating tangle of misinterpretations of Norse sagas, scribal errors during the laborious hand-copying of earlier maps, and the general difficulty of accurately charting such a vast and inhospitable coastline. The Norse, who had settled parts of Greenland centuries earlier, had their own accounts and perhaps rudimentary charts. As this knowledge filtered south into Europe, often through many intermediaries, names could get mangled, and locations distorted. It's not hard to imagine a scribe, painstakingly copying an older map by flickering candlelight, misreading Gronland or Engrenland and perhaps inadvertently splitting it, or misplacing a section of coastline due to a torn or unclear original. Repeat this a few times, and a detached piece of Greenland might just take on a life of its own, christened with a slightly garbled version of its parent's name. Grokland. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue like Treasure Island, does it? Sounds more like a place where old Viking myths went for a very long, very cold nap. One of the quirky tidbits surrounding Grokland is this very etymological confusion. The slight variations in spelling, Gronland, Groenlandia, Engrenland, Grokland, Grokland, could easily lead a later cartographer, comparing multiple source maps, to believe they were referring to two distinct places, especially if the geographical depictions also varied significantly. Cartographic historians still piece together the exact chain of errors and interpretations that led to Grokland's stubborn presence, debating which specific voyages or manuscript maps were the primary sources for this enduring geographical doppelganger. Was it a misunderstood sighting by one group of explorers, faithfully copied and then misinterpreted by another generation of mapmakers? Or was it a simple clerical blunder that took on an undeserved geographical reality? The legacy of Grokland is one of quiet confusion rather than dramatic legend. It didn't have tales of magicians or promises of appearing every 7 years. Its main role was to be a geographical puzzle, a persistent question mark in the icy northern waters. It served as a reminder that even in an era of great leaps in exploration and cartography, the process of accurately mapping the world was slow, iterative, and prone to some remarkably persistent errors. Eventually, as more and more voyages charted the true, vast, and complex coastline of Greenland, it became clear that Grokland wasn't a separate entity. It was either a part of Greenland itself, misidentified or misplaced, or simply a cartographic ghost. Slowly, it was merged back into its larger neighbor on the maps, its spectral form fading as the real outline of Greenland came into sharper focus. No dramatic sinking, no lingering myths of enchantment, just a quiet absorption, like a shadow rejoining its owner at high noon. Leaving the chilly enigma of Grokland, Greenland's ghostly twin, our spectral ship sails south, far south, into the tempestuous waters of the South Atlantic. You're now in a region that was crucial for global maritime power, the gateway around Cape Horn, and a place where the British Admiralty, in particular, kept a very keen eye on their charts. Here, Phantom Islands weren't just quaint curiosities, they were potential strategic assets or dangerous navigational hazards. And one of the most persistently frustrating of these phantoms bore the name of a very famous Londoner, Samuel Pepys. Now, you might know Samuel Pepys from his incredibly detailed diary, a fantastic window into 17th-century London life, complete with fires, plagues, and his own rather human foibles. But Pepys was also a hugely influential administrator for the Royal Navy. He worked tirelessly to professionalize the service, improve shipbuilding, and ensure the Navy was a formidable force. So, you can imagine him, diligent and meticulous, perhaps being rather pleased to hear that a newly discovered island in the strategically important South Atlantic had been named in his honor. Pepys Island, you say? Splendid. Does it boast a decent anchorage? Are there ample supplies of timber for ship repairs? And perhaps a quiet spot for a fellow to enjoy a bit of reading? He probably made a very neat entry about it in his diary. The discovery of Pepys Island, and we use discovery with a rather large, phantom-shaped asterisk here, is attributed to the buccaneer-turned-navigator Ambrose Cowley, around 1683 or 1684. While sailing in the South Atlantic, Cowley reported sighting an unknown island. He didn't just give it a passing glance, he provided a surprisingly detailed description. He noted its approximate location, roughly 230 miles north of the Falkland Islands, mentioned it had a commodious harbor, a safe place for ships to anchor, access to fresh water, and even wildlife, including what he described as fowls, in such abundance that they could feed a ship's crew. He dutifully named it Pepys Island, a smart move if you wanted to curry favor with the naval establishment back in England. This detailed report, coming from an experienced seaman, gave Pepys Island a strong claim to existence, and it soon appeared on Admiralty charts, a mainstream historical fact of its ephemeral life. You can see why the Admiralty would be very interested. An island in that remote and stormy part of the world, especially one with fresh water and a good harbor, would be an invaluable asset. It could serve as a resupply point for ships undertaking the brutal passage around Cape Horn, a place for repairs, or even a potential naval base. So, the search for Pepys Island began in earnest. And search they did. For the better part of a century, Royal Navy vessels, as well as ships from other nations, were instructed to keep a lookout for Pepys Island if their voyages took them anywhere near its supposed coordinates. Captains would scan the horizon, hoping to be the one to finally confirm its existence and perhaps enjoy those refreshments Cowley had mentioned. Sailors hearing of a commodious harbor were probably dreaming of a 17th-century motorway service station, but with more seagulls and less stale coffee. But Pepys Island proved to be remarkably coy. Voyage after voyage sailed through the area, finding nothing but rolling gray waves and perhaps some rather confused albatrosses. The sheer number of fruitless searches is one of the quirky tidbits of its story. Despite Cowley's confident description, no one else could seem to locate this promising piece of land. It became a source of considerable frustration for the Admiralty. They had an island on their official charts, an island named after one of their most respected figures, an island that should be there, and yet, it stubbornly refused to materialize. The Royal Navy spent so much time and effort looking for Pepys Island, you'd think it was rumored to contain the lost treasure of the Incas or the secret to making ship's biscuit actually palatable. Spoiler, it wasn't. It was hiding nothing more than the vast emptiness of the ocean. Debate continues among maritime historians as to what exactly Ambrose Cowley saw, or thought he saw. Did he genuinely mistake one of the Falkland Islands, perhaps sighted from an unusual distance or in poor weather, and miscalculate its position significantly? Could it have been a fleeting glimpse of the Patagonian coast under strange atmospheric conditions? Or, more cynically, did his account contain elements of exaggeration, perhaps to enhance his own reputation as a discoverer or to please his patrons back home who were always eager for news of new territories. It's hard to say for sure, but the detail in his description lent it a stubborn credibility that took a long time to erode. Pepys Island wasn't the only phantom causing headaches in these southern waters. The South Atlantic, with its often foul weather, strong currents, and vast unexplored expanses, was a fertile breeding ground for cartographic ghosts. Islands would appear on charts based on tentative sightings, only to vanish again when subsequent voyages couldn't confirm them. Each one represented a potential danger or a missed opportunity, a nagging uncertainty for those who had to navigate these perilous seas. Eventually, after countless expeditions had sailed right over its charted location, finding only the deep blue sea, Pepys Island was quietly removed from the Admiralty charts in the late 18th century. The search was called off. Poor Samuel Pepys, his cartographic namesake, turned out to be as ephemeral as some of the resolutions he recorded in his diary after a particularly good night out. But for a while, Pepys Island was a very real puzzle, a frustrating blip on the Admiralty's otherwise increasingly accurate map of the world, and a testament to the fact that even the most powerful navies could be sent on a wild goose chase by a well-told story and a conveniently placed phantom. Our spectral journey has so far navigated us through the age of sail, through hand-drawn charts and the hazy reports of buccaneers and early explorers. You might be thinking, surely, in our modern era of pinpoint GPS, satellite imagery, and digital databases that map every nook and cranny of the globe, these phantom islands are a thing of the past. Surely, we've charted every last speck of land with cold, hard, digital precision. Well, you'd be mostly right. Mostly. But now, prepare to fast forward dramatically, leaving Samuel Pepys and his frustrating phantom far behind, as we set a course for the 21st century, and the rather surprising case of Sandy Island. Yes, even in an age where your phone can tell you where to find the nearest artisanal coffee shop with terrifying accuracy, phantom islands can still give us a little wink from the digital void. Imagine you idly browse Google Earth, perhaps planning a dream voyage across the Pacific. You're zooming in on the Coral Sea, that beautiful stretch of water nestled between Australia and New Caledonia. And there, on your screen, clear as day, or as clear as a satellite image can be, you might have seen it, a distinct, dark smudge, an elongated shape labeled Sandy Island. It wasn't a tiny little blip either. This was a fairly substantial landmass, supposedly about 24 kilometers, or 15 miles, long and 5 kilometers, 3 miles, wide. Roughly the size of Manhattan, if Manhattan decided to relocate to a much warmer, and apparently non-existent, climate. That's a pretty significant piece of real estate to just be casually floating about on our digital maps. It's not like misplacing your car keys, it's like misplacing an entire New York borough, complete with phantom yellow cabs and imaginary squirrels fighting over spectral pizza crusts. For years, Sandy Island existed quite happily in the digital realm. It appeared on Google Maps, Google Earth, and various other online mapping services and databases, which, in today's world, is pretty much the official stamp of, yep, this place is real. Countless virtual explorers sailed past it, perhaps even dropped a pin on it, blissfully unaware that they were interacting with a ghost. This is a mainstream historical fact of our very recent past. A phantom island had successfully infiltrated the digital age. Then came November 2012. An Australian research vessel, the RV Southern Surveyor, was on a scientific expedition in the Coral Sea, studying plate tectonics. Their planned route took them right through the charted location of Sandy Island. Now, scientists tend to be a curious and precise bunch. When their ship's navigation systems and depth sounders indicated nothing but deep, open ocean where a sizable island was supposed to be, eyebrows were undoubtedly raised. Imagine the scene on the bridge, Captain, are we quite sure about our position? According to every instrument we have, and indeed the actual wet stuff out the window, we are in over 1,400 meters of water. Well, according to this very popular online map, we should currently be experiencing a rather sandy beach. Perhaps it's a very, very flat, very, very submerged island. They had, quite literally, undiscovered an island. The news of Sandy Island's non-existence made a delightful splash in the media. Here was a charmingly old-fashioned mystery, a phantom island, popping up in the hypermodern context of global digital mapping. It was a reminder that even with all our technology, the world can still hold a few cartographic surprises. The reactions ranged from amusement to genuine curiosity about how such an error could persist. Google quietly removed Sandy Island from its maps, leaving just the deep blue of the Coral Sea where it once lay. So, where did this 21st century phantom come from? This is where the story gets a bit more like its historical predecessors. One quirky tidbit is that Sandy Island wasn't a brand new digital invention. It had actually appeared on some paper nautical charts for over a century, with some sources tracing its first charting back to a whaling ship, the Velocity, around 1876. It's possible the original report was a navigational error, a misidentified reef, a pumice raft, collections of volcanic rock that can float for vast distances and look like islands, or even, as with older phantoms, just a mistake. Once it made its way onto an official-looking paper chart, it had the potential to be copied, to become an accepted fact. And when modern digital databases were being compiled, these older charts were often used as source material. If an old, respected hydrographic chart said Sandy Island was there, into the database it went. Digital cartographers and data scientists still explore the pathways by which such ghost entries, or nil pointers, in database jargon, can propagate through modern mapping systems. It highlights the ongoing challenge of data verification, even when you have satellites whizzing overhead. Sometimes an error, once embedded in a foundational dataset, can be incredibly difficult to root out, getting copied from one database to another without fresh verification. It's like a digital game of telephone, where Sandy Island was the garbled message that just kept getting passed along. The case of Sandy Island serves as a wonderful, gentle reminder that maps, even the incredibly sophisticated digital ones we rely on daily, are still human creations, mediated by data that was once collected, transcribed, and interpreted by people. They are representations of the world, not the world itself. And sometimes, just sometimes, they can still show us places that aren't quite there, little echoes from the past, or glitches in the digital matrix. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, as you scroll across your phone screen, what other tiny phantoms might still be lurking in the data, waiting for their own RV Southern surveyor to sail by and say, hang on a minute. It almost adds a little bit of sleepy magic back into our overly charted world. We've navigated from the icy shores of Friesland to the misty coasts of Hy-Brasil, from the Admiralty's frustration over Peep's Island right into the 21st century with the surprising Sandy Island. You've seen these phantoms appear and disappear on charts, each with its own peculiar story. But now, let's pause our voyage for a moment and peer a little deeper into the very origins of these cartographic ghosts. How exactly is a phantom island born? What are the ingredients that cook up a landmass out of thin, or rather, salty air? It turns out there's a whole recipe book of reasons, ranging from completely innocent blunders to, well, let's just say more creatively intentioned narratives. One of the most common culprits, as you've probably gathered, was simple, honest-to-goodness human error in observation and navigation. Remember our old friend, the longitude problem? For centuries, accurately determining your east-west position at sea was a massive headache. This mainstream historical fact is central to understanding so many phantom sightings. A ship could calculate its latitude, north-south, fairly well, but a miscalculation in longitude could mean that an island genuinely sighted was charted hundreds of miles from its true location. The next mariner sailing to those incorrect coordinates would find nothing, while the original island sat quite happily where it always was, probably wondering why it wasn't getting more visitors. Then there was the simple act of misidentifying known land. Approaching a familiar coastline from an unusual angle, in poor visibility, or with inaccurate charts could easily lead a captain to believe they'd stumbled upon a new, uncharted island, rather than just the backside of good old Isle of Wight. And sometimes, sailors just saw things that weren't islands at all. Imagine you're on watch, scanning the endless horizon for weeks. Your eyes are tired, the light is playing tricks. A distant, unusually shaped iceberg, a dense fog bank rolling on the water, a peculiar cloud formation sitting low on the horizon, all of these could, for a hopeful or anxious moment, resemble land. Land ho, someone might cry, only for the land to melt, dissipate, or drift away. Sailor 1, Captain, I swear I saw cliffs. Sailor 2, peering through a spyglass, Jenkins, that appears to be an exceptionally large, and rather grumpy-looking, walrus colony on a bit of floating ice. Remarkable, but not quite an island for Her Majesty. There are even accounts of vast mats of sargassum seaweed, or large pumice rafts created by underwater volcanic eruptions, a quirky tidbit for you, being mistaken for solid ground from a distance. Then you have the fascinating world of atmospheric phenomena. Ever heard of a fata morgana? This is a complex type of mirage that can appear on the horizon, especially in polar regions or over large bodies of water. It can make distant objects, like ships, icebergs, or even a low-lying, unseen coastline, appear elevated, distorted, and sometimes fantastically castle-like. It's easy to see how a mariner, witnessing such an ethereal, shimmering land on the horizon, might believe they've discovered a new, perhaps enchanted, island. This is another mainstream historical fact: mirages have been well documented as sources of geographical confusion. Beyond what was seen, or misseen, at sea, were the errors that crept in back on dry land, in the quiet scriptoriums and busy workshops of the cartographers themselves. We've touched on the perils of hand-copying maps. A slip of the quill, an inkblot misinterpreted, a name misspelled or a coastline smudged, these could all generate errors that, once introduced, were often faithfully reproduced for generations. Imagine a weary monk, hunched over his vellum late at night, the candlelight flickering. He sneezes, his hand jerks, and suddenly that tiny smudge he just made in the middle of the Atlantic looks suspiciously like an island. Oh dear, he might think, well, perhaps Brother Seamus knew something I didn't. In it goes. This, cartographic inertia, a reluctance to remove something that had been charted by respected predecessors, even if it was suspect, also played a significant role. No one wanted to be the one to declare that the great Mercator or Ptolemy had made a boo-boo. And then, of course, we wade into murkier waters, deliberate fabrications. It's a slightly cynical thought, but not every phantom island was an innocent mistake. Some, it's strongly suspected, were put on maps for less than honest reasons. An explorer, eager for fame or hoping to secure funding for another, more lavish expedition, might embellish his findings, or even invent an island outright, complete with descriptions of its rich resources and amenable natives. Your Majesty, I found an island positively overflowing with gold, spices, and easily domesticated dodo birds. I just need a few more ships and, say, a small duchy upon my return. Political motives also came into play. Charting an island, even a non-existent one, in a contested area could be a way of laying a tentative claim to that region, or at least of making your nation's presence felt on the map, a sort of cartographic flag planting. The precise balance between unintentional error and conscious invention in the creation of certain long-lived phantoms is still a subject of much discussion among historians of cartography, especially when direct evidence of motive is scarce. Was Captain X genuinely mistaken by that fog bank for the third time, or was he subtly trying to dissuade rivals from a particularly good fishing ground by charting a non-existent hazard? It's often hard to tell. Ultimately, the birth of a phantom island was often a collaborative effort, a perfect storm of challenging conditions at sea, the limitations of early science, the fallibility of human perception and memory, and the ever-present human desire to fill in the blanks, to discover, and sometimes, to dream a little bigger than the ocean itself. Each one is a tiny monument to that complex interplay of hope, error, and ambition. You've now got a good sense of how these phantom islands could be conjured into existence, through errors at sea, tricks of light, slips of the pen, or even the occasional tall tale spun with a twinkle in the eye. But let's drift for a while in the shoes, or perhaps the comfy slippers, of the cartographers themselves. Imagine yourself hunched over a vast wooden table, the scent of ink and parchment filling your nostrils, the weight of the world, or at least, representing it accurately, resting on your shoulders. It wasn't an easy gig, and these mapmakers faced a peculiar set of pressures and conundrums that often nudged phantom islands from the realm of pure speculation onto the official record. One of the biggest psychological pressures was a concept known in art and cartography as horror vacui, literally, the fear of empty spaces. This is a well-documented mainstream idea. To the sensibilities of many eras, a map with vast, blank expanses of ocean or unexplored territory just looked unfinished. It might imply that the mapmaker was lazy, or worse, ignorant. A richly detailed map, bustling with coastlines, islands, and perhaps a few decorative sea monsters, looked far more impressive and authoritative. So, if there was a rather large, intimidatingly empty patch of blue on your chart, there was a subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, temptation to fill it. You might muse, scratching your chin with your quill, this bit of the Pacific is looking dreadfully sparse. Didn't Captain Stormtosser mention seeing something out that way? A smudge on the horizon? Close enough. Let's pop in a tentative little island. Much better. Now, about that kraken for the South Atlantic. Then there was the thorny issue of sources. As a cartographer, especially before the age of systematic, government-sponsored surveys, you were heavily reliant on the reports of others. Your primary informants were the sailors, the explorers, the traders who ventured into the unknown and returned with their precious, often confusing, cargo of information. You'd be poring over ships' logs, if they were kept diligently, interviewing captains, who might be more interested in impressing you than in strict accuracy, and trying to make sense of sketches drawn on scraps of parchment amidst the chaos of a long voyage. The cartographer's suggestion box for newly discovered lands was probably less a formal system and more a case of listening intently in smoky dockside taverns, trying to sift the plausible from the wildly improbable. He swore he saw an island made of cheese, you say. Fascinating. Perhaps we'll mark that one as existence doubtful, for now. And what did you do when faced with conflicting reports, or a single, uncorroborated sighting of a new island? This led directly to another powerful force, the immense authority of previously published maps. Cartography has always been an iterative art, each map building upon those that came before. If a renowned master like Ptolemy, Mercator, or Ortelius had depicted an island, who were you, a humble mapmaker in, say, Antwerp or Amsterdam, to summarily dismiss it? It was generally considered safer, and often more commercially astute, to include such historically sanctioned features, perhaps with a little note like Insula Medoro, Secundum Ptolomeum, Medoro Island, according to Ptolemy, even if you had your own private doubts. Removing a feature that your revered predecessors had included? That was a bold move. It was like publicly disagreeing with the most learned scholar in the land, you'd better have some very solid proof, or risk looking like an arrogant upstart. This cartographic inertia meant that once an island, phantom or not, made it onto an influential map, it could be copied and recopied for centuries, a ghostly passenger on the currents of cartographic tradition. Commercial pressures also played a significant role, another mainstream historical fact of the mapmaking world. From the 16th century onwards, map publishing became a thriving and highly competitive business. Firms in major centers like Amsterdam, Paris, and London vied to produce the most comprehensive, up-to-date, and visually appealing atlases. A map that looked sparse and empty might not sell as well as one that seemed to burst with information, promising the buyer a glimpse of a world teeming with detail and discovery. Including the latest, reported islands, even if their existence was unverified, could give a map an edge, making it seem more current than its rivals. And let's not forget the aesthetic appeal. Early maps were often works of art as much as scientific documents. Those beautiful, elaborate cartouches framing the map's title, the intricate compass roses, the depictions of ships sailing bravely on inked oceans, and yes, the occasional spouting whale or fearsome sea serpent frolicking in an otherwise empty patch of sea, these weren't just whimsical decorations. This is a quirky tidbit for you, these embellishments help to fill those dreaded empty spaces, to balance the composition, and to make the map a more desirable object. Sometimes, a strategically placed, and entirely speculative, island chain could do the same trick. The degree to which early mapmakers consciously prioritized this aesthetic completeness or commercial appeal over rigorously verified accuracy is a nuanced question still explored by researchers. Standards of truth and accuracy in cartography were themselves evolving. Some mapmakers were undoubtedly scrupulous scholars, weighing every piece of evidence. Others may have been more inclined to err on the side of inclusion, or perhaps, artistic license. You can almost hear the internal monologue, well, I haven't got firm proof of this Isle of Enchantment, but it does balance out that rather dull stretch of ocean nicely, and old Captain Blackheart seemed quite insistent. In it goes. It was a constant balancing act between received wisdom, new reports, scientific rigor, as it was then understood, artistic convention, and the very practical need to produce a map that people would trust, buy, and use, even if it led them on the occasional wild goose chase for an island made of hope and hearsay. You've been in the quiet, ink-stained world of the cartographer, wrestling with empty spaces and dubious reports. Now, let's heave anchor and join the brave, sometimes foolhardy, souls who actually had to sail out and find these elusive, imaginary lands. You're on deck now, the salt spray in your face, the creak of the timbers your constant companion, as we recount some of the ambitious, often frustratingly fruitless, expeditions launched in pursuit of phantom islands. It wasn't enough for these places to exist on paper. Kings, merchants, and admirals wanted them found, claimed, and preferably, exploited. Why embark on such perilous and uncertain quests? The motivations were as varied as the phantoms themselves. For some, it was the glittering promise of riches. Legendary islands were often whispered to be laden with gold, silver, spices, or other treasures ripe for the taking. For others, particularly naval powers, a newly confirmed island in a strategic location could offer a vital resupply base, a sheltered harbor, or a crucial stepping stone for further exploration or control of trade routes. National prestige was a huge driver too. Planting your nation's flag on a new piece of territory, even a tiny one, was a matter of immense pride and a way to score points against your rivals. And, of course, there was simple scientific curiosity, or at least the desire to confirm or correct the charts that guided them. If a map said an island was there, well, someone had to go and check, didn't they? We've already touched upon Martin Frobisher's confident discovery of Frisland, which turned out to be Greenland. But he wasn't the only one to be led astray by that particular phantom. For over a century, ships plying the North Atlantic routes would keep a hopeful, or perhaps wary, eye out for Frisland's icy shores, their captains trying to reconcile their charts with the often empty horizon. Similarly, remember the Admiralty's persistent, decades-long search for Pepys Island in the South Atlantic? Multiple Royal Navy vessels were dispatched with specific instructions to locate it, equipped with the best navigational tools of their time. They'd sail to the given coordinates, crisscross the area, take soundings, and invariably return with the same report: nothing but open ocean. These expeditions spent months, sometimes years, essentially playing the world's most expensive and uncomfortable game of oceanic hide-and-seek. And the ocean, being rather good at keeping secrets, especially for things that weren't there to begin with, usually won. The Spanish, in their quest to dominate the vast Pacific, launched numerous expeditions from their colonies in the Americas in search of mythical islands whispered to hold incredible wealth. One notable example is the search for the Solomon Islands. Now, the Solomons are very real, as you know, but after their initial European discovery by Alvaro de Mendana in 1568, their exact location was lost for a considerable time due to navigational inaccuracies. For decades, Spanish navigators searched in vain for these Isles of Solomon, believing them to be the source of King Solomon's legendary gold. This is a mainstream historical fact. Real islands became temporary phantoms, fueling decades of costly and often dangerous voyages. Then there were the great systematic voyages of explorers like Captain James Cook in the latter half of the 18th century. Cook, with his meticulous surveying methods and superior navigational skills, thanks in part to the newfangled chronometer for determining longitude, did more than most to sweep some of the more persistent phantoms from the charts, particularly in the South Pacific. While his primary mission was often the search for the great Terra Australis Incognita, a massive southern continent believed to balance the land masses of the northern hemisphere, his voyages also definitively disproved the existence of many smaller, long-rumored islands. He'd sail to their charted positions, find nothing, and make a firm note, does not exist. It must have been satisfying, in a way, to bring such clarity, but perhaps also a little disappointing for those back home still dreaming of easy discoveries. These voyages were no pleasure cruises, mind you. This is where a quirky, or rather grim, tidbit comes in, the sheer hardship endured. Sailors were cooped up for months, even years, on cramped, damp ships. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, was rampant, leading to a slow, agonizing decline. Storms could appear with little warning, battering ships and washing men overboard. The risk of getting hopelessly lost, running aground on uncharted, real, reefs, or encountering hostile receptions was ever present. Imagine the psychological toll, weeks of scanning an empty horizon, the initial flicker of hope at a distant cloud bank, then the dawning, familiar disappointment. You can almost hear the lookout, after the 10th false alarm that week, land ho. Oh, wait, no, Captain, it's just, another exceptionally large flock of very sarcastic-looking seagulls. My apologies. The extent to which some expedition leaders genuinely believed in the phantoms they sought, versus perhaps using the official search for a charted island as a convenient pretext for broader exploratory voyages or even geopolitical maneuvering, is sometimes difficult to ascertain from historical records. Yes, Your Majesty, we're definitely going to look for the Isle of Blessed Ointments, as charted by Brother Cuthbert in 1342. And while we're in the neighborhood, we might just have a little peek at that coastline your rivals seem so interested in. It was a complex dance of duty, ambition, and sometimes, sheer wishful thinking. Returning home after years at sea, with holds full of, well, mostly just sea stories and perhaps a few barrels of salted fish instead of gold, must have been a deflating experience. So, Admiral, you found the mythical land of El Dorado Jr., as shown on this very expensive map? Well, Minister, not as such. But we did confirm, with a very high degree of certainty, that there is an awful lot of water in that particular part of the ocean. And the sunsets were occasionally quite nice. Next voyage, perhaps. Yet, they kept going, chasing these shadows on the map, driven by that potent human cocktail of hope, curiosity, and the unwavering belief that just beyond the next wave, discovery might await. You've sailed on those hopeful, often disheartening, expeditions seeking out lands that stubbornly refuse to exist. But Phantom Islands weren't just a challenge for dedicated explorers, they were a persistent, nagging headache, and sometimes a genuine menace, for the everyday mariner simply trying to get from port A to port B with ship, cargo, and crew intact. These cartographical specters cast long, troublesome shadows over the practical business of navigating the world's oceans, leading to wasted resources, profound confusion, and occasionally, outright peril. Imagine you're the captain of a merchant vessel in the 18th century, on a long haul from Bristol to Boston, or perhaps attempting the treacherous route around Cape Horn. Your most precious tool, aside from your wits and your sextant, is your collection of nautical charts. You rely on these inked parchments to guide you through storms, away from known reefs, and towards safe anchorages or vital watering holes. Now, picture your frustration when these charts are littered with non-existent islands. You might divert your course for days, burning precious time and consuming dwindling supplies of food and water, to try and make landfall at a Good Hope Island that turns out to be nothing but an optimistic smudge on your map. Sailing for weeks to find Isle non-existia, only to be met with endless blue, really put a dent in the profit margins, not to mention the biscuit budget. And when the biscuits ran low, the crew might start eyeing the ship's parrot with a disconcerting level of culinary curiosity. This wastage of time and resources was a significant, though often hidden, cost of Phantom Islands. Every extra day spent at sea meant more wages for the crew, more wear and tear on the ship, and a greater risk of spoilage for perishable cargo. For naval vessels on patrol or on a mission, such delays could have strategic implications. Assessing the precise cumulative economic impact of Phantom Islands on global trade over centuries is a complex calculation, given the multitude of factors affecting maritime voyages, but anecdotal evidence and logical inference suggest it was not insignificant. Each phantom was a potential detour, a spanner in the works of global commerce. Beyond the economic toll, there was the sheer navigational confusion these ghosts created. A captain, trying to fix his position, might sight a real, known island but misidentify it as a nearby phantom shown on his chart, throwing off all his subsequent calculations. Or, conversely, he might dismiss a genuine, newly sighted, but uncharted, small island as, probably just another one of those phantom smudges, failing to record a real hazard. Imagine the stress in the cramped navigation room, captain's log, day 97, still no sign of reliable rock island for our rendezvous. Chart insists it's here. The ocean vehemently disagrees. I'm beginning to suspect the ocean might be the more sober of the two parties involved in this chart's creation. This constant uncertainty could erode a captain's confidence in his charts, making an already demanding job even more fraught. And sometimes, this confusion could lead directly to peril. While it's hard to definitively state that a specific shipwreck was caused solely by a phantom island, the presence of inaccurate information on charts undoubtedly contributed to maritime disasters. A ship searching for a non-existent island for shelter or resupply might be lured away from safer, known routes and into genuinely dangerous waters, uncharted reefs, storm-prone areas, or hostile coastlines. Think of relying on a charted, freshwater bay, on a phantom island when your water casks are nearly empty, only to find nothing. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it could be a death sentence, leaving a vessel stranded hundreds of miles from any actual source of aid. Relying on a phantom island for your next vital stop was like trusting a chocolate teapot to hold your boiling water, inevitably disappointing, and potentially disastrous if you were far from any other options. There's a quirky tidbit in the folklore of the sea: sailors, a superstitious and practical bunch, likely developed their own colorful curses for inaccurate charts and the mapmakers who produced them. You can almost hear a grizzled old salt, after a week spent searching for an island that wasn't there, muttering, "May your compass spin like a drunken dancer and your charts be used by incontinent seagulls, ye lying landlubber map drawer." While perhaps not historically documented with precision, the sentiment was surely there. The frustration of being led astray by what was supposed to be a trustworthy guide must have been immense. Documented instances of confusion, like those around the Falklands and the mythical Peeps Island, illustrate the problem. The whole area was a navigational nightmare for a long time, with real islands being mistaken for phantoms, and phantoms being diligently searched for near-real islands. This misidentification could lead ships to misjudge their approach to dangerous coastlines or to miss vital passages. While the grand, dramatic shipwreck caused by chasing a ghost might be rare, the cumulative effect of these navigational uncertainties, the near misses, the groundings in unexpected shallows, the ships weakened by prolonged, unnecessary exposure to bad weather, certainly took its toll on men and vessels. So, these phantom islands were more than just charming errors on old maps. They were active agents of mischief, complicating voyages, bleeding resources, and adding an unnecessary layer of danger and uncertainty to the already perilous life at sea. They were the navigational nightmares that kept captains awake at night, peering into the darkness for lands that would never materialize, while the real dangers of the ocean were all too present. Each correction, each phantom erased, was a small victory for safety and efficiency on the high seas. You've weathered the navigational nightmares, felt the frustration of wasted voyages, and perhaps even cursed a few of those spectral smudges on the charts yourself. It's clear these phantom islands were more than just quaint historical oddities, they were real impediments. So, how did we finally manage to sweep these cartographic cobwebs from the world's maps? It wasn't an overnight spring cleaning, let me tell you. Erasing the imaginary was a slow, meticulous, and sometimes surprisingly reluctant process, a gradual dawning of geographic daylight after a long, shadowy twilight. The journey towards cleaner charts really picked up speed with the broader currents of the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries. There was a growing emphasis on reason, empirical observation, and scientific accuracy in all fields, including geography and navigation. This era saw the development and refinement of crucial navigational tools. The marine chronometer, finally allowing for the accurate determination of longitude at sea, was a game-changer. Improved sextants, better understanding of magnetic variation, and more systematic methods for surveying coastlines all contributed to a rising tide of precision. You couldn't just wave vaguely at a hazy horizon and declare an island anymore. Increasingly, you needed coordinates, verifiable sightings, and detailed descriptions. A key mainstream historical fact in this demystification of the oceans was the establishment and rise of official hydrographic offices in major maritime nations. The British Admiralty Hydrographic Office, founded in 1795, and its French counterpart, the Dépôt de Cartes et Plans de la Marine, which had earlier origins but was formally organized, along with similar bodies in countries like Spain and the Netherlands, took on the monumental task of systematically surveying the world's oceans and producing reliable charts for their navies and merchant marines. Their mission wasn't just to draw maps, but to verify them, to correct the errors of the past, and to ensure that what was depicted actually existed. The official island eraser at the Admiralty probably had a very busy, if occasionally disheartening, job. Right, logbook entry 47B, Isle of Perpetual Fog reported non-existent by 3 separate captains. Time to fetch the special India rubber. Who's next on the list? The Bay of Wishful Thinking figures. The process of undiscovery was often a gradual one. It might begin with a few scattered reports from experienced captains noting that a charted island couldn't be found at its given coordinates. Initially, these might be dismissed, perhaps the captain was off in his own reckoning, or weather conditions were poor. That old cartographic inertia we've talked about was a powerful force. Mapmakers were often hesitant to remove a feature that had been accepted for generations based on just 1 or 2 negative reports. You can imagine some phantom islands clinging to the charts like stubborn barnacles to a ship's hull, muttering, "But I've been a landmark for 200 years. You can't just erase me. My feelings are real, even if my coastline isn't." However, as negative reports accumulated from trusted sources, or as specific survey expeditions were dispatched to the area with the express purpose of verification, the evidence against a phantom would mount. These survey ships would meticulously crisscross the charted location, taking soundings, making astronomical observations, and leaving no patch of empty ocean unscrutinized. If, after all that, no land was found, the island's status would be downgraded, perhaps to existence doubtful, ED as it often appeared on charts, or position approximate, PA. Eventually, with enough conclusive negative evidence, the order would be given for its complete removal. One quirky tidbit is the tale of some of the very last phantoms to be officially expunged from charts, sometimes lingering well into the age of steam and wireless telegraphy. Doherty Island, for example, supposedly in the far South Pacific, was seen in 1841 and remained on some charts until the early 20th century before improved surveys finally confirmed its non-existence. It's a reminder that even with advancing technology, old errors could be remarkably persistent. The exact point at which absence of evidence became evidence of absence for certain phantom islands varied considerably across different hydrographic offices and time periods, often depending on the strategic importance of the area, the persistence of local legends, or even the personal conviction of key cartographers. Some were probably quite fond of their more picturesque phantoms. Imagine the scene in a bustling hydrographic office. A senior cartographer, perhaps with a sigh, takes his pen to a long-standing, beautifully engraved island that has graced their charts for a century. He carefully draws a line through it, or notes, deleted from the records, date. There might have been a touch of melancholy in erasing these familiar, if fictional, features. "Farewell, Isle of Contentment," he might whisper, "you looked so charmingly round, and your imaginary harbor was always so conveniently placed. The First Lord will miss you at tea-time map discussions." This slow cleansing of the charts was more than just an academic exercise. Every phantom island removed was a potential hazard neutralized, a source of confusion eliminated, a step towards safer and more efficient global navigation. The oceans on the maps gradually became emptier, in one sense, stripped of their mythical clutter, but fuller, in another, filled with more accurate and reliable information. It marked a significant shift in how we viewed maps, less as repositories of ancient lore, artistry, and hopeful speculation, and more as precise scientific instruments designed for the serious business of navigating a very real, and often challenging, planet. The age of the speculative sea monster in the margins was giving way to the age of the meticulously sounded depth contour. And for sailors everywhere, that was a very welcome change indeed. Our journey through the world of Phantom Islands has shown us their birth from error and imagination, the determined voyages to find them, the frustrations they caused, and the slow, meticulous process of their erasure from our working charts. The maps before you now, whether on your screen or in a modern atlas, are cleaner, more scientifically precise representations of our planet. The vast majority of those spectral land masses have been banished. And yet, you might feel a tiny, almost imperceptible tug, a faint whisper of something more than just relief at their departure. Why is that? Why do these lost lands, these islands that never truly were, still hold such a deep and peculiar fascination for us? It taps into something fundamental, doesn't it? That innate human yearning to explore, to discover, to peek over the next horizon simply to see what's there. For much of our history, the world was a vast unknown, and maps were not just guides but also repositories of dreams, fears, and boundless possibilities. Every empty space on a chart was an invitation to wonder. Could there be a paradise just beyond the waves? A land untouched by the sorrows of the known world? Phantom Islands, in many ways, were the physical embodiment of these hopes. They were the maybe lands, the what-ifs sketched in ink. Part of us, perhaps the part that still enjoys a good fairy tale or a thrilling adventure story, just wants there to be a land of uninterrupted sunshine and perfectly ripe mangoes still waiting to be found. Sign me up for that particular sleepy expedition. This romantic appeal is deeply woven into our cultural fabric. Think of the enduring myths of lost continents like Atlantis, swallowed by the sea yet forever lingering in our collective imagination as a symbol of a utopian past, or the legends of El Dorado, the city of gold, that lured so many to their doom in the Americas. These are mainstream historical facts of our storytelling. Phantom Islands are the smaller cousins of these grand myths, more intimate, perhaps, but born from the same desire for a world beyond the mundane, a place where the rules of ordinary life might not apply. Hy-Brasil, with its promise of periodic appearances and otherworldly inhabitants, is a perfect example. It wasn't just a navigational error, it was a portal to the magical. Literature and art have, of course, feasted on the concept of hidden, mysterious, or entirely fictional islands for centuries. From Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, with its strangely populated lands like Lilliput and Brobdingnag, to Jules Verne's The Mysterious Island, where castaways create their own world on an uncharted isle, the idea of a secluded landmass, conveniently separate from the known world, has been an incredibly fertile ground for storytelling. Authors loved Phantom Islands, or at least the idea of them. It's much easier to write about societies with peculiar customs, prehistoric creatures, or advanced, or comically backward, civilizations if they're located somewhere conveniently unfindable on your average P&O cruise itinerary. No, you can't book a holiday there, it's, perpetually shrouded in a very specific type of plot-convenient fog. And only visible to people whose names begin with Q on a Thursday. Even today, in our seemingly fully mapped and satellite-scrutinized world, there's a quirky tidbit: the allure persists. You can find online communities dedicated to discussing cartographic mysteries, poring over old charts, and speculating about the origins of these geographical ghosts. There are modern-day Phantom Island hunters who, while perhaps not expecting to find actual new land, find joy in the historical detective work, in tracing the lineage of an error, or in simply appreciating the artistry and imagination of older maps. In a world where your phone can pinpoint the nearest gas station with almost unnerving precision, there's a certain romantic charm to the idea that a whole island might once have successfully played hide-and-seek with humanity for centuries. Whether the enduring appeal of Phantom Islands in popular culture stems more from a romantic desire for an escape from the thoroughly documented reality of our planet, or a deeper psychological need to believe in unresolved mysteries and the possibility of the undiscovered, is a question that continues to intrigue cultural historians and psychologists alike. Perhaps it's a bit of both. These stories remind us of a time when the globe felt larger, when "here be dragons" wasn't just a quaint phrase but a genuine expression of the unknown lurking beyond the horizon. There's a nostalgia, perhaps, for that sense of boundless mystery. Phantom Islands, in their quiet, non-existent way, invite us to think about the nature of knowledge itself, how it's gathered, how it's recorded, and how easily it can be shaped by our beliefs, our errors, and our hopes. They are gentle ghosts that remind us that even the most scientific-looking documents can contain traces of human dreams. As you drift off, consider the comfort in knowing that while the physical world is now meticulously charted, the landscapes of your imagination remain wonderfully, gloriously, full of phantom islands, waiting for you to explore their misty shores, no sextant or chronometer required, just the gentle currents of your own sleepy thoughts. Our long, sleepy voyage through the mists of time and across the parchment oceans is drawing to a gentle close. You've seen how these phantom islands were born, how they lived stubbornly on our charts, and how, one by one, they were carefully, meticulously, erased by the rising tide of scientific knowledge. We've pondered their romantic allure, the way they speak to our love of mystery and the unknown. But as you settle deeper into your comfort, let's consider the echoes these cartographic ghosts have left behind in the ongoing, almost obsessive, quest for perfect accuracy in the maps that guide us today. The legacy of Phantom Islands is a subtle but important one. They serve as a quiet reminder of human fallibility, of our capacity to believe, to hope, and sometimes, to get things wonderfully wrong. They teach us humility in the face of the vastness of the world, and the crucial importance of critical thinking, of questioning, and of constant verification. They show us that maps are not just passive mirrors of reality, but active creations, shaped by the knowledge, the tools, the biases, and even the dreams of their time. That little shiver of, what if, you felt when we talked about Hy-Brasil? That's part of their enduring gift. Today, of course, you navigate your world with tools that would have seemed like pure magic to the mariners of old. Global positioning systems in your pocket, geographic information systems layering data with incredible complexity, satellite imagery that can zoom in on your own backyard, and even artificial intelligence helping to chart and update our world in real time. The aspiration is for a perfectly accurate, minutely detailed, constantly current map of everything. And in many ways, we're remarkably close. Yet, do faint echoes of Phantom Islands still linger, even in our digital age? Well, as the relatively recent case of Sandy Island showed us, even large errors can sometimes slip through the digital net. But more often, today's phantoms are subtler creatures. They might be a misaligned street on your GPS that tries to send you on an adventure through a one-way alley the wrong way, or into a peaceful cow pasture. It's modern technology's charming little way of keeping the spirit of unexpected phantom voyages alive, one slightly bewildered detour at a time. They can be outdated building footprints in a rapidly developing city, or minor discrepancies in elevation that only a dedicated hiker might notice. And here's a mainstream historical fact for the modern era: sometimes, these little errors are entirely intentional. Mapmakers, even today, have been known to insert tiny, fictitious entries, a non-existent street, a paper town, or a slightly altered geographical feature, as copyright traps. If that unique, fake feature appears on a competitor's map, it's a bit like finding your own secret doodle in someone else's notebook. "Aha!" cries the mapmaker, "I knew you were tracing my homework. Enjoy your visit to Imaginary Lane, you scoundrel." These are, in a way, our modern, deliberate phantoms, born not of myth but of intellectual property law. Then there's the quirky, philosophical tidbit that any map, by its very nature, is an abstraction of reality. It's a scaled-down, simplified model. It can never capture every single detail, every nuance of the real world. The coastline you see on a map isn't the infinitely complex fractal boundary of the real land, it's an approximation. So, in a philosophical sense, perhaps every map contains tiny, unavoidable phantoms, the details it omits, the generalizations it makes. The challenge of maintaining absolute accuracy and currency in global digital maps, given constant geological shifts like coastal erosion or volcanic activity, remember Hunga Tonga, Hunga Hapai literally reshaping itself, rapid urban development, and even shifting political boundaries, remains a significant ongoing discussion among cartographic agencies and tech companies. Achieving a truly perfect, perpetually up-to-the-minute map of the entire dynamic Earth is like trying to paint a portrait of a toddler who's just had 3 espressos. A noble, fascinating, and endlessly ongoing endeavor. The quest for ever greater accuracy continues, of course. Crowdsourced projects like OpenStreetMap empower individuals around the world to contribute to and correct map data, creating incredibly detailed and responsive resources. Commercial giants and government agencies pour vast resources into satellite constellations, aerial surveys, and ground truthing operations. Yet, the echoes of those old phantom islands serve as a valuable lesson, to remain curious, to question, and to appreciate the immense effort and ingenuity that goes into creating the maps we so often take for granted. While you're unlikely to stumble upon a Frisland or a Peeps Island on your next holiday GPS route, the spirit of exploration, the joy of understanding our world, and the gentle humor in our past cartographic missteps can still be wonderfully soothing companions as you drift towards sleep. The world may be well charted, but it still holds its wonders, and your dreams are territories yet to be fully explored. And so, our long voyage through the curious case of Phantom Islands gently comes to anchor. We've sailed on seas of ink and imagination, explored lands that shimmered just beyond the horizon of reality, and met the cartographers and mariners who charted them, searched for them, and eventually, with a little reluctance, erased them. You felt the chill of Frisland's imaginary glaciers, pondered the misty allure of Hy-Brasil, and perhaps even chuckled at the bureaucratic bewilderment caused by Peeps Island. From the earliest mariners peering into the unknown, driven by hope and hearsay, to the modern scientists uncovering digital ghosts like Sandy Island, the story of Phantom Islands is a human story, one of error, yes, but also of enduring curiosity, of the romance of discovery, and of our unending quest to make sense of the vast, beautiful world around us. These cartographic specters, though no longer cluttering our official charts, linger as gentle reminders. They remind us that knowledge is a journey, not a destination, that even the most confident maps can hold mysteries, and that the line between the known and the imagined is sometimes as fine and wavering as a coastline drawn by a tired hand by flickering candlelight centuries ago. So now, as the last echoes of these tales fade, let the vast, quiet ocean of sleep claim you. May your own dreams be filled with gentle discoveries, with peaceful shores, and with the serene understanding that even in a well-mapped world, there is always room for wonder. Let the gentle waves of relaxation carry you, deeper and deeper, into a calm and restful night. The journey is complete. The phantoms are at peace. And so, hopefully, are you.